Well, where we are, I'm facing now what was a state road. And the state road, we moved on up near the North Carolina line. And the state road has crossed the curve of the highway. It did run along the river when we were this morning over on the reservoir. The state road was inundated, some parts of it, over on that side by the reservoir. But in its original pattern, it had left that side of the ridge and switched over the ridge, which we have seen, to this, the western side of the ridge, near what we call Posey Mountain. And I think this is Posey Creek, as far as that's concerned. Well, Poinsett being in the area and is credited for looking after the building of the road in the mountains, he had to have a place to stay. So this house that he stayed in was a typical two-story frame house, but it did not have the typical inside pattern, but outside one would see in that day. And he stayed in that house, according to the word of mouth, during the time that he was up here to be near the site where the work was going on in the mountains. The house that he stayed in, Wilson Barton, Colonel Wilson Barton, had some improvements on the land. I don't know how far back, but the state of South Carolina, they had the grant on the land to Wilson Barton about 1845. But even though he had made improvements, so I don't know about the status of that. But anyway, I'm not getting. But that's where, according to tradition, and it's accepted that Poinsett spent his time here at that particular time. Now, Barton, when the land, he already had the improvements. The state deeded him the land. I think it was later, after the state road was constructed. And at that time, John A. Leland was the state of South Carolina superintendent of public works. And at that particular time in that transaction, when that land was placed in Barton's name officially or whatever, it was the Leland who was the superintendent of the public works. He, in that agreement, that land was placed in this site here, the Poinsett land, was placed in the name, was to be placed in the name of John A. Leland, and a certain amount of the road that was there. The spring that fed the basin was given, as we go into the house from the front, the spring was just a little to the right of the house, right front of the house. It wasn't right directly in front of the house, but as you went into the house on the front door, which was near the center to your right, was a spring basin. And that's where the water was made. Poinsett paid for that himself to give water to the traveling people. See, it's very difficult to get a drink of water or something if you get off to a creek or a spring or something like that. So that was his gift to the traveling public, that spring. So that spring basin remained here until after World War II, and it wound up down in the city of town of Greenville, and still down there. He will not give it up and let it be brought back to this area. So he did that. So there's many accounts, which we'll get some of those later, of people traveling. Like one, for example, he had a thermometer. At the basin, he said the temperature of the water was 50-something degrees, but it was probably a couple of degrees cooler at the spring. The spring was about 200 feet from the basin, and the water was piped from the spring in wooden pipe. That was common in those days. They'd cut off a sapling, a pole, a log, and bore a hole in it lengthwise, sharpen one end of it like a pencil and the other end like a funnel. And that's the way they joined those together, and that's the way that water was piped into this bridge on the basis of people who lived here and knew about it.